The Mafia boss was cold and distant, until his ex accidentally sent a photo holding a baby in hospital. I used to believe that silence was power. That the fewer words I spoke, the more control I had over everything and everyone. In the world I live in, that belief built me an empire that breathes fear and moves in shadows. People call me Dominic Russo, the man who never flinches, never hesitates, never feels. They see me as the ghost that walks the streets of New York without leaving a footprint, the one whose name alone can make grown men lower their gaze. And yet, if they could see me when the night falls quiet, they'd realize the truth, that behind the tailored suits, the guarded eyes, and the cold voice is a man who forgot how to live the moment she walked away. 5 years. It's been 5 long, merciless years since Sophia Romano left my life, and still, her name echoes in every corner of my mind. I tell myself I buried her memory beneath the weight of deals and orders, under the sound of footsteps that scatter at my approach, but no matter how deep I bury her, she finds her way back to me. Sometimes it's her laughter, faint and distant, playing in the back of my mind like a melody I can't turn off. Sometimes it's the scent of her perfume, something soft and floral that lingers in my imagination, tricking me into thinking she's just around the corner. I've trained my face to show nothing, my heart to feel nothing, but the truth is that the mansion I live in, the one that people envy, feels more like a mausoleum than a home. Every room carries the echo of what we once had, the ghost of the life I lost. I walk through corridors filled with art and luxury, but all I see is emptiness, the kind that money can't fill. My men think I'm untouchable, and maybe that's the illusion I've built too well, but there are nights when the silence in this place feels heavy enough to crush me. I sit by the window in my office, watching the city lights blink like dying stars, and I wonder how it all became so hollow. Power, respect, fear, they all came at a price, and that price was her. Sophia didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because she couldn't survive the darkness I carried. I remember the night she walked away, her voice trembling but steady, her eyes full of something between sorrow and strength. She said she couldn't stand watching me destroy myself, that the man she loved was disappearing behind the armor I built. I didn't chase her. I let her go, convinced that needing her made me weak. But every day after that, I realized that losing her didn't make me stronger, it made me colder. My empire grew, my name reached new corners of the city, and yet, every victory felt meaningless. The thrill that once came with control faded, replaced by a quiet ache I couldn't shake off. People think heartbreak is a single moment, one sharp cut you recover from, but it's not. It's a slow bleed, one that drains you quietly while you pretend to be fine. I've become a master at pretending. During the day, I play the part everyone expects, the strategist, the leader, the man who makes impossible decisions without blinking. But when night falls and the noise of the world dies down, the mask slips. I think about the way her hand fit perfectly into mine, the way she used to say my name when no one else was around, soft and warm, like it meant something more than just sound. I think about the future we once imagined, a life far away from this chaos, where we could just be ordinary. But men like me don't get ordinary. We get what's left after the world takes everything from us. The funny thing is, people believe I chose this life. Maybe once I did, out of pride or survival. But now it feels more like the life chose me, trapped me, and Sophia was the only one who ever offered a way out. I didn't take it. And now, I live surrounded by everything except peace. Every morning, I wake before the sun, and for a moment, I almost forget. I almost reach for the other side of the bed before I remember it's empty. I tell myself I'm fine, that I've accepted it, but the truth is simpler and crueler. I miss her. I miss her in ways words can't touch. Maybe that's why I stay so quiet. Words can't fix what silence broke. The men who serve me, they fear my calmness. They think it's strength. They don't realize it's just exhaustion, a deep, endless kind of tiredness that no sleep can heal. They look at me like I'm invincible, but inside, I'm just a man haunted by a choice I can't undo. I thought love was a distraction, a weakness that could destroy me. But in losing Sophia, I learned that love was the only thing that ever made me human. And now, I'm left as something less, not quite a monster, not quite a man, but something in between, walking through the ruins of a life I built with my own hands. Maybe that's what being the cold king really means, ruling over everything except your own heart. The thing about silence is that after a while, it starts to speak back to you. It tells you things you've spent years trying to forget. I hear it when I walk through the long marble hallway of my mansion at night, my footsteps echoing off the walls like faint reminders of the life I ruined. Sometimes I stop halfway, standing in front of the large mirror near the staircase. I stare at my reflection, the expensive suit, the gold watch, the sharp jawline people say commands respect, and I wonder when exactly this image became my prison. I built this empire from nothing, piece by piece, deal by deal, believing that power could replace love, that control could silence pain. But the truth is, all I did was surround myself with walls so high that no one, not even I, could climb out anymore. People come and go through my doors every day, men who owe me loyalty, fear, or both, yet I've never felt more alone. I see the way they look at me, the mixture of admiration and terror. To them, I am the symbol of what they wish to become, and the warning of what it will cost. They speak to me with reverence, but none of them know the weight I carry. They don't see how some nights I sit in my office long after everyone's gone, staring at the dim glow of the city through the window, tracing the outline of her name in my mind like a prayer I've forgotten how to say. The city outside never sleeps, but I do, in pieces. Every sound that breaks the night reminds me of her voice, the way she'd whisper my name when she thought I was asleep, the way her laugh could cut through even my darkest moods. I used to believe that love was a weakness. Now I know that living without it is far worse. I've become so good at pretending that sometimes even I believe my own act, the calm, the precision, the emotionless control. But there are moments when my guard slips. When I catch a glimpse of something that reminds me of her, a woman crossing the street with long dark hair, the scent of jasmine drifting from a passing car, and for a few seconds, the world stops. I find myself frozen, trapped in a moment that isn't even mine anymore. Then reality snaps back, cold and sharp, reminding me that the past is something I can't afford to chase. I return to my desk, drown myself in work, sign papers, make calls, issue orders, all to keep my mind from wandering into places it shouldn't go. And yet, every path in my thoughts leads back to her. The night we met still plays in my head like an old film. I remember the rain falling over the city, the sound of jazz bleeding from a cafe, the way she looked up when I walked in, curious, cautious, unafraid. She didn't know who I was then, and for once, I didn't want her to. She spoke to me like I was just another man, not the name whispered in fear across New York. Maybe that's why I fell for her so fast, because she saw me before the world did. But love, in my world, is dangerous. It gives people something to use against you, and I couldn't allow that. I started to pull away, thinking distance would protect her. Instead, it broke her. I can still hear the sound of her crying the night she left, the words she said, that I'd become a man who loved his empire more than his own soul. She was right. I didn't stop her. I told myself it was for her safety, that she'd be better off far away from me. Maybe that was true. But it doesn't make the silence any easier. Every night since, I've lived with the echo of that door closing behind her. I've achieved everything I once dreamed of, respect, power, wealth, but every victory feels hollow, every celebration a quiet reminder of what's missing. Even my closest allies don't understand. They see my control as strength, my isolation as discipline. They don't see how it eats at me, slowly, day by day. I sometimes think about calling her, just to hear her voice again, to know she's still out there breathing the same air. But I never do. I tell myself she's moved on, that she's happy somewhere far away from all this. That's what keeps me from reaching for the phone in the middle of the night when loneliness wraps around me like chains. I don't know if I'm afraid of hearing her voice, or of the silence that might follow if she doesn't answer. So, I stay where I am, buried beneath everything I thought I wanted. The men call me the king, but what kind of king rules over emptiness? What kind of man builds a kingdom only to sit alone on its throne? There's a certain kind of cruelty in realizing too late that all the things you chased were distractions from what truly mattered. I thought love was something that would weaken me, but losing it turned me into something far worse, a man without purpose, living on routine, breathing out of habit. And yet, no one sees that side of me. They only see the mask, the cold, calculating face of Dominic Russo, untouchable and invincible. I keep it that way because it's easier. Vulnerability is a luxury I can't afford. Not in my world. Not anymore. But sometimes, when the city quiets and even my guards fall asleep, I allow myself a moment of weakness. I pour a glass of whiskey, sit by the window, and whisper her name into the darkness, not because I expect an answer, but because it reminds me I'm still human beneath all this armor. The night listens, the wind carries her memory, and for a brief second, the cold inside me softens. Then morning comes, and I put the mask back on. The world wakes. And I become the cold king again, ruling, commanding, pretending that the silence doesn't speak louder than I ever could. It was almost midnight when I found myself buried under the glow of the desk lamp. The silence of my office heavy enough to drown in. The papers in front of me blurring into meaningless numbers and ink. My mind wasn't here, it rarely was anymore, but I forced it to stay focused, because work was the only thing that kept the ghosts quiet. I was reviewing a shipment report, tracing the path of steel containers that would move through the docks by dawn, when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. No one dared disturb me this late. But then the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in 5 years. Sophia. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that my loneliness had finally begun to play tricks on me. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the phone, hands moving slower than they ever had in a fight. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, the hum of the city beyond my window fading into nothing. When I opened the message, my world stopped. It wasn't words, it was an image. A single photograph that shattered the walls I had spent years building. Sophia was in a hospital gown, her hair pulled back, her eyes red from crying but softer than I remembered. In her arms, she held a baby wrapped in a white blanket, her hand resting protectively on the child's chest. The light from the hospital window caught the side of her face, and I could almost feel that warmth, that softness I had forgotten existed. I didn't know what to think. My body froze. My mind screamed. For years, I had trained myself to control everything, my empire, my men, my emotions, but in that moment, I couldn't control the trembling in my hands. My chest tightened as if someone had reached inside and twisted my heart until it cracked open. I stared at the photo, at the way she looked down at that baby, and an ache spread through me that I hadn't felt since the night she left. She looked happy, but also exhausted, fragile, human. The kind of real that power never gives you. My first thought was that this couldn't be real, that maybe it was some mistake, some wrong number, but I knew her face too well to doubt it. It was Sophia. And that was a baby. Her baby. 1,000 questions hit me at once, sharp and merciless. Who was the father? Where was she? Was she safe? Why now, after all this time? Why send me this? But beneath all of it, a darker, quieter thought pushed through, one I didn't want to believe but couldn't stop from forming. What if that child was mine? The idea burned through me, wild and uninvited, filling my chest with something between panic and hope. I zoomed in on the picture like a desperate man, studying the child's small face, the curve of its nose, the shape of its tiny hands. It was impossible to tell, but the thought clung to me like fire. My pulse thundered in my ears. I looked around my office, the same room that had witnessed my rise, my downfall, my loneliness, and suddenly it all felt foreign, useless. The paintings, the polished desk, the trophies of a man who thought control could replace connection. All of it meant nothing against a single photograph. I could feel my throat tightening, that strange sting behind my eyes that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. My phone screen dimmed, and I quickly touched it again, unwilling to let the image fade. I wanted to speak, to say something, but my voice cracked when I whispered her name. Sophia. It felt foreign on my tongue, like a memory being spoken aloud after too long. Whose child is that? The words barely escaped me, a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something like regret. For years, I had convinced myself that I had closed that chapter of my life, sealed it with pride and silence, but this broke through all of it. The silence of the room returned, thicker than before. The sound of the clock ticking on the far wall became deafening, each second stretching into forever. I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the phone like it was the last real thing in my world. My mind ran wild, dragging me through every memory I had tried to bury, her smile, her voice, her tears the night she said goodbye. And now, here she was again, not in person, not in words, but through an image that carried more power than anything I had ever held. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing: my life, the one I had spent years keeping under control, had just shifted. The balance I built was gone, replaced by a quiet chaos that started with a single message. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that she had meant to send it to someone else, but deep down, I knew fate doesn't make mistakes that cruel. My empire, my rules, my composure, none of it mattered now. All I could see was her face and that child in her arms, the softness of that moment cutting through every wall I had ever built. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the cold king everyone feared. I just felt human. And it terrified me. The message stayed on my screen long after the light in my office had dimmed and the city beyond the glass fell into its restless hum, and I couldn't pull my eyes away from it. Everything in me that had been hard and certain a few minutes earlier began to unravel, thread by thread. I kept staring at that photograph, waiting for it to explain itself, to give me some clue as to why it had found its way to me. Sophia's face carried a quiet tenderness I hadn't seen since the beginning, when life was still simple enough for her to laugh without fear. There was something in the way her hand curved protectively around the small bundle in her arms, the tilt of her head, the exhaustion written in her eyes. It felt too intimate for me to see, too fragile to belong in the world I had built, and yet there it was, glowing in my hand, daring me to remember what it felt like to care about something other than survival. I told myself to breathe, to think, to be rational, but reason was a foreign language that night. My heart pounded against my ribs as if it were trying to remind me that it still existed, that it could still feel. I rose from the chair and began to pace, the floorboards creaking beneath the weight of my steps. My office suddenly felt suffocating, the air heavy with a silence that seemed alive. I moved to the window and stared out at the endless stretch of lights and streets I controlled. All of it pulsing with the illusion of order. Yet all of it meaningless compared to the single unanswered question that now consumed me. I could take down an enemy without hesitation, negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking, but this tiny photograph, had broken through every layer of my defenses. I replayed the image over and over in my mind, searching for something, anything, that would tell me it wasn't what I feared or hoped it might be. Her hair was longer, her body thinner, and though time had changed her, she was still Sophia. Still the woman whose laughter once filled the hollowness I carried. I thought about calling her, my thumb hovering above her name on the screen, but I couldn't press it. What would I even say? Why are you showing me this? Who is the child? The questions sounded hollow in my head. I didn't have the right to ask them. I had forfeited that right the day I let her walk away. I sank back into my chair, the leather creaking under the weight of my confusion. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger's, eyes too tired, shoulders too tense, a man who'd built a fortress only to realize he was the prisoner inside it. I brought the phone closer, zooming in on the photo until the pixels blurred, desperate to find a clue. The baby's face was small, peaceful, and even though I knew it was impossible to see resemblance in an infant, my mind began to imagine it anyway, the shape of its mouth, the faint shadow of hair. My thoughts betrayed me. Could this child be mine? The idea sent a tremor through me. I leaned back and shut my eyes, but the image stayed burned against my lids. Memories of Sophia flooded in, the way she'd rest her hand over her stomach in the mornings when she thought I wasn't looking. The quiet moments when she'd talk about wanting a family someday, about love without fear. I had always turned away, convinced that dreams like that were dangerous in a life like mine. Now, I wondered if that dream had found her without me. The clock on my desk ticked louder, each second dragging, mocking me with its steadiness. I reached for the glass of whiskey I'd poured earlier, now warm and untouched, and took a slow sip. The burn did nothing. My world had shifted in one heartbeat. And I didn't know which part of me to trust anymore, the man who had built his life on control or the man who suddenly wanted to reach across time and space just to hear her voice again. My phone buzzed once more, and my body tensed, hope flaring like a spark in the dark. But it wasn't her. Just a message from one of my men, routine, meaningless. I set the phone down and exhaled, realizing how ridiculous I must look. Dominic Russo, the man everyone fears, shaken by a single photograph. Yet the feeling wouldn't leave me. I kept seeing that baby's face, the tenderness in Sophia's eyes, the unspoken story behind them. It gnawed at me, this quiet ache that no amount of logic could dull. I could feel the faint pull of something deep and old, a part of myself I thought had died the night she left. I didn't know what the picture meant, but I knew that nothing would be the same after seeing it. That image had cracked open something inside me that had been sealed for far too long. I stayed in that chair until the first light of morning spilled across the floor, the city waking up to a new day while I sat frozen in the same moment. My phone lay beside me, still glowing faintly with her message, the question echoing in my mind over and over until it became a prayer. Sophia, I whispered again, my voice raw, almost broken. Whose child is that? And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't want the answer to come from anyone else. The night refused him rest, it pressed on his chest like a weight that wouldn't move, filling the silence with ghosts he thought he'd buried years ago. Dominic lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, while fragments of memory flickered through the darkness like broken film. Sophia's voice, soft, pleading, angry, twisted in his mind, tangled with the sound of rain on the night she left. He could still see her in the doorway, the glow from the streetlight outlining her silhouette as she turned away without a word. He remembered the argument, his voice too cold, hers too fragile, her hands trembling as she said she couldn't love a man who only knew how to destroy. He'd told himself he didn't care then, that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. But now, years later, in the quiet ache of his mansion, he realized how wrong he'd been. Every room still carried her absence, every reflection carried her ghost. He had spent years convincing himself that she was better off without him, that his world would only poison her gentle heart. Yet one accidental message had torn apart the illusion he had built with such precision. The image of her holding that child haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He had tried to drown the thought in work, in whiskey, in the endless noise of his empire, but the silence that followed each distraction was louder than ever. It was not business that occupied his thoughts anymore, it was the question that refused to die. Was it his child? He didn't want to admit it, not even to himself, but the truth gnawed at him like a slow-burning fever. On the third night without sleep, Dominic finally gave in. The mask of the cold, untouchable boss cracked, revealing the man who had been lost beneath it. As dawn crawled through the blinds, he rose, dressed in his usual tailored black suit, and walked out without a word. His driver didn't ask questions when he ordered to go to St. Grace Hospital. No one dared to question Dominic Russo when his voice carried that kind of quiet threat. The city was gray and wet, the streets reflecting the light of the Rolls-Royce as it moved through traffic like a shadow. Dominic sat in the back, his jaw clenched, his heart waging a silent war between pride and fear. He wasn't sure what he would say when he saw her, or if he even had the right to speak. But he needed to see for himself, to know the truth that had been clawing at his sanity. The drive felt endless, and yet too short. When the car rolled to a stop outside St. Grace, he stared at the building for a long moment, feeling something unfamiliar, hesitation. For the first time in years, the man who had faced death without flinching found himself afraid. He stepped out, the sound of his shoes echoing against the marble steps. Inside, the sterile white corridors contrasted violently with the darkness he carried within. The moment the staff recognized him, the air shifted, whispers rippled through the hall like wind through dry leaves. The Mafia boss had arrived, the man whose name was spoken with both fear and fascination. Yet his eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were softer now, clouded with something almost human. He ignored the glances, the stiff backs, the sudden quiet. Every step brought back a memory, the time Sophia had been sick and he'd sat by her hospital bed, holding her hand while pretending he didn't care, the way she'd laughed when he told her to stop worrying about him. Those moments replayed like fragments of a life he had killed with his own hands. When he reached the reception desk, he simply said her name, and the nurse froze. She didn't ask who he was, everyone knew who Dominic Russo was. Within seconds, he was being led down the hallway, his footsteps heavy with everything unspoken. The closer he got to her room, the tighter his chest became, until he felt like he was walking toward judgment itself. He paused at the door, staring at the white paint, his reflection faint in the glass panel. His hand trembled, not from fear of her, but from fear of what her eyes might tell him. He had faced gunfire, betrayal, and death without hesitation, but this was different. This was Sophia, the one person who could break him with a glance. Slowly, he knocked. The sound was softer than he intended, almost hesitant. A few seconds passed, the longest seconds of his life, before he heard movement inside. The door opened slightly, and there she was. Time stopped. Sophia Romano, the woman who once made his heart forget how to be cold, stood before him in the pale light of the hospital room. Her face was thinner, her hair slightly messy, and exhaustion clung to her features. But her eyes, those same amber eyes that once made him believe in something pure, widened in shock. She didn't say a word. Neither did he. The air between them was thick with 5 years of silence, filled with everything they had left unsaid. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Dominic wanted to speak, to say her name, but his voice refused to obey. All he could do was look at her, the woman he had loved and lost, and feel the walls he had built inside himself begin to crumble. Sophia's lips parted slightly, disbelief flickering across her face as if she were seeing a ghost. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of her hospital room, Dominic realized that no empire, no power, no wealth could ever prepare a man for the weight of seeing the past come alive again. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight, trembling under the weight of everything unspoken. Dominic stood there, every instinct screaming to say something, to break the unbearable quiet, yet words felt like intruders in the fragile air of that hospital room. Sophia's eyes darted to the ground, then back to him, disbelief and panic flickering in their depths. She looked fragile, not the vibrant woman he remembered, her skin pale against the white hospital sheets, her shoulders trembling ever so slightly beneath the thin gown. The soft hum of the monitors filled the background, the rhythmic beeping of a newborn's heart blending with the uneven sound of his own breathing. Dominic stepped inside, slow and deliberate, the door clicking shut behind him like a verdict. Every movement felt heavy, sacred, dangerous. He didn't know whether he was welcome here, yet something about the way she looked at him, part fear, part heartbreak, told him she hadn't forgotten. He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. Sophia, just her name, barely a whisper, but it hung in the air like an echo from another lifetime. She flinched as if the sound hurt her. "Why are you here, Dominic?" Her tone wasn't angry, but wounded, like someone who'd been cut too many times to bleed anymore. He hesitated, his throat tightening around the words. "You sent me a message." He pulled out his phone, the glow of the screen reflecting faintly in his eyes. "A picture." For a second, confusion crossed her face, then realization dawned. Her lips parted slightly, and she let out a quiet, broken laugh that wasn't amusement but disbelief. That wasn't meant for you." Her voice cracked at the end, and she turned her face away, wiping her cheek as if trying to erase the moment. Dominic's heart sank, though he didn't understand why. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Then who was it meant for?" The question came out softer than he intended, but the tremor beneath it betrayed the storm he was holding back. Sophia didn't answer. Her silence told him more than words ever could. She simply turned toward the small bassinet by her bed, where the baby slept wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Dominic followed her gaze, and the world seemed to blur. The child's tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, impossibly small, impossibly peaceful. He felt something inside him fracture, a quiet, devastating break that no one could see but him. For a moment, the air left his lungs. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel: anger, confusion, hope, but what he felt was something far more dangerous, longing. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. Is he yours? Sophia's eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again with the resolve of someone who had learned to protect what mattered most. Mine, she said simply, though her voice trembled slightly on the word. Dominic's gaze didn't leave her. And his father? The question fell between them like a blade. She looked away, and that was enough of an answer. He could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the fear, the ache she couldn't hide. The silence screamed louder than any confession. Dominic's hand clenched at his side, his pulse roaring in his ears. Every part of him wanted to demand the truth, to make her say it, but when he saw the tears gathering in her eyes, the sharpness drained from him. He took another step forward. Then stopped himself, realizing that his presence might be the very thing causing her pain. He glanced around the room, the flowers on the bedside table, the soft light spilling across the floor, the quiet hum of a place meant for healing. It felt foreign to him, a sanctuary that didn't belong to monsters like Dominic Russo. He turned slightly toward the window, exhaling slowly, trying to steady himself. You should have told me, he said, his voice low but shaking. You had the chance to. Sophia closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. And then what, Dominic? You'd come back? Bring him into your world? I did what I had to do. Her words were laced with quiet fury, the kind born from heartbreak, not hate. You don't get to show up now and act like you still have a say. The truth stung, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew she was right. He had no claim, not on her, not on the child, not on the life she had fought to rebuild away from him. Yet seeing her now, seeing that baby sleeping beside her, tore through him in a way no bullet ever could. He felt something foreign in his chest, not the cold rage he was used to, but sorrow, raw and unfamiliar. He didn't know how long he stood there, silent, trying to breathe through the ache clawing at him. Then, softly, he said, I never stopped thinking about you. It wasn't a confession he had planned. It simply escaped, fragile and real. Sophia's eyes lifted, meeting his. For a brief, fleeting second, the years between them disappeared. He could see the woman who once smiled just for him, who believed there was still good in the man everyone feared. But then she looked away, breaking whatever fragile thread had connected them. It's too late for that, Dominic, she whispered. Her voice carried the quiet finality of someone who'd already mourned him long ago. The words hit him harder than any gunshot. He wanted to speak, to tell her it wasn't too late, that he could change, that he was still hers somehow, but he couldn't lie to her, not anymore. The truth was carved too deep into him, he had become the very monster she once begged him not to become. Slowly, he nodded, his face unreadable but his eyes wet with something he refused to name. He took one last look at her, then at the baby, and felt the world tilt. Without another word, he turned toward the door. But before he reached it, he paused. He's beautiful, he said quietly, his voice breaking at the edge. You did good, Sophia. And then he walked out, not because he wanted to, but because if he stayed a moment longer, he knew he wouldn't be able to leave at all. The world seemed to tilt as her words slipped into the air. Soft and trembling, yet heavy enough to shatter everything Dominic believed he could control. He's your son. The sentence echoed in his mind, over and over, until it no longer felt real. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The room itself seemed to collapse inward, the sterile white walls spinning, the faint hum of machines fading into a dull, distant roar. His knees hit the cold floor before he even realized he was moving. The man who ruled New York's underworld, the man who had turned fear into armor, now knelt helplessly beside a woman who once loved him and a child he had never known existed. His eyes fell on the baby, tiny fingers curled into a fist, chest rising and falling with soft, steady breaths, and for the first time in years, Dominic Russo felt something he didn't recognize, awe. A strange warmth, sharp and overwhelming, spread through his chest. Luca, he whispered, tasting the name like a confession. His throat tightened. The name sounded sacred, as if saying it out loud made it real, made him real. He looked up at Sophia, his gaze wild with disbelief and something far more fragile. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out broken, barely more than a rasp. She couldn't meet his eyes. Her arms tightened protectively around the baby, as though she feared he might vanish if she let go. I wanted to, she said finally, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she had carried alone. But how could I, Dominic? How could I bring a child into your world? Into that darkness? Her words were not cruel. They were raw, the kind that cut because they were true. Dominic closed his eyes, swallowing hard against the ache clawing up his chest. You think I wouldn't have protected him? He asked quietly. You think I wouldn't have given up everything? Sophia's voice broke. You wouldn't have known how. That sentence hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The man he had been, the ruthless boss who buried mercy under power, could never have been a father. He had been too lost, too angry, too consumed by the ghosts of his past. And yet, as he looked at the baby, something inside him shifted, a small but undeniable spark of the man he could have been, the man she once believed still existed somewhere beneath the scars. His hand trembled as he reached out, hesitant, stopping just short of touching the tiny blanket. Sophia's breath caught, her instincts torn between protection and surrender. But then, slowly, she loosened her hold and let him see, truly see, the small miracle she had hidden from him all this time. The moment his fingertips brushed the baby's hand, Dominic felt his entire world collapse into that single point of contact. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around his own, and something inside him broke open, a flood of emotion so fierce he had to look away. His voice cracked when he whispered, I missed everything. His first breath, your pain, all of it. The confession wasn't just sorrow. It was guilt, raw, unbearable guilt. Years of silence, of empty nights spent chasing shadows, now felt meaningless in the face of the small life he hadn't known he'd helped create. Tears stung his eyes, and for once, he didn't hide them. Sophia's gaze softened through her own tears, watching him with a mix of love and grief. You weren't ready, Dominic, she whispered, almost to herself. You were still trying to destroy yourself back then. I couldn't let our son be part of that. Her words trembled in the air, gentle yet final. He wanted to argue, to tell her he would have changed, but the truth was, he couldn't remember a time when he had been capable of anything other than survival. The silence that followed was thick with everything that could never be undone. Dominic stayed kneeling, eyes locked on his son, as though memorizing every detail, the faint curls of his hair, the small rise of his chest. The peaceful oblivion of a child who knew nothing of the war his parents carried inside them. Luca, he murmured again, his voice barely audible, as if speaking the name might make up for the years he had lost. He didn't realize he was shaking until Sophia's hand brushed against his, hesitant but real. You were never supposed to see that photo, she said softly. It was an accident. But maybe it wasn't. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him, searching for the man she used to know. Maybe fate wanted you to know. Dominic's lips parted, but no words came. He could only nod slightly, overwhelmed by the cruel grace of it all. For years he had built his life on control, on knowing every move before it happened, but now fate had undone him with one simple twist. He felt small in a way he hadn't since childhood, stripped of his armor, standing in front of something pure and fragile that didn't belong to the darkness he ruled. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breath catching as he whispered, he deserves better than me. Sophia's hand tightened around his, firm yet trembling. He deserves to know you, she said quietly. Even if you think you're not ready. He looked at her then. Really looked at her, the woman he had driven away, who had carried his child in secret. Who had survived without him but still spoke with kindness instead of hate. There was strength in her that humbled him. He nodded slowly, eyes burning, his heart heavier than it had ever been. For the first time in a long time, Dominic Russo, the man everyone feared, felt something dangerously close to redemption flicker inside him. It was small, uncertain, but real. The sound of Luca's quiet breathing filled the room, a fragile rhythm that felt louder than Dominic's thoughts. He couldn't look away from the baby, from the proof of a life that existed without him, from the tiny miracle that had his eyes, his jawline, even the faint curve of Sophia's mouth. His world, once a map of precision and control, now lay scattered before him in the shape of a child's hand. He had faced betrayal, blood, and the sharp edge of death, but nothing had ever made him tremble the way this small being did. His heart, so used to silence, felt as though it were waking up from years of sleep. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice, but it came out raw. "Does he know about me?" he asked quietly, though the answer was obvious. Sophia shook her head. "He's too young," she whispered. "And even if he weren't? I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't want him to grow up afraid of your world." Her voice cracked, her eyes glassy with emotion. Dominic nodded slowly, though the words hit him like a blade. He couldn't blame her, he had created that world, one made of fear and loyalty bought with blood. "I would have changed," he said after a long pause, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. "If I'd known about him, I swear I would have," Sophia cut him off gently, her tone both tender and heartbreaking. "Dominic, you couldn't even change for yourself. How could you have changed for someone else?" The truth landed like a quiet explosion, stripping away what little defense he had left. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. For years, he had told himself he didn't regret anything, that every choice, every sin, was part of survival. But now, as he sat in the presence of the only two people who had ever made him feel human, regret burned through him like acid. He reached out again, this time braver, and placed his palm on Luca's tiny chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. It was surreal, to feel life so pure, so untouched by the darkness that had consumed his own. His vision blurred as tears welled up, but he didn't look away. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You did everything right, Sophia." She turned her face away, biting her lip to stop herself from crying, but a tear slipped down anyway. "I didn't do it alone," she murmured. "There were nights I thought I couldn't. But every time he smiled, every time he breathed, I told myself I had to be strong. For him. For me." Her words cracked something deeper inside him. He realized then how much she had endured, the loneliness, the fear, the strength it took to walk away from the man she loved and raise his child in silence. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," he said, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't have had to carry that." Sophia looked at him, her expression softening but still wary. "You made your choice, Dominic. You chose the throne, the empire, the power. I just stepped out of your shadow before it swallowed me too." Her words weren't meant to wound, yet they did. They reminded him of the truth he had run from, that everything he thought he was building had cost him the only thing that ever mattered. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he remembered, but someone stronger, shaped by pain and perseverance. "I thought I was protecting you," he said quietly. "Keeping you safe from everything I am." "No," she whispered. "You were protecting yourself. From love? From the one thing you couldn't control." The room went silent again, the weight of her honesty pressing between them. Dominic's hands trembled, and he brushed his thumb gently against the edge of Luca's blanket, grounding himself in the only truth that mattered now, that this child was his. And that he had already lost years he could never get back. He felt the gravity of it in his chest, a pain that wasn't anger or guilt, but something softer, something that hurt because it was pure. "Can I hold him?" he asked suddenly, his voice fragile. Sophia hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Then she nodded slowly. "Just be gentle," she whispered. He exhaled shakily as she placed Luca carefully into his arms. The baby stirred, tiny fingers brushing against the fabric of his shirt, and Dominic felt his breath catch. The warmth of that small body against his chest disarmed him completely. His hands, rough from a life of violence, cradled the most delicate thing he had ever touched. For a moment, he forgot who he was, not a boss, not a monster, not a man feared by all, just a father, holding his son for the first time. The child's weight felt both light and infinite. Dominic's throat tightened, his eyes fixed on the soft curve of Luca's face. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice shaking. I'm your dad." The words broke him open. He had never said them before, never thought he would. Sophia watched him silently, her heart twisting at the sight, the ruthless man she once loved reduced to tears by a child who didn't even know his name yet. For the first time in years, she saw the Dominic she once fell for, not the king of crime, but the man who once held her hand under a sky full of city lights, promising her a future he never knew how to give. Dominic looked up at her, his eyes wet. "I don't deserve either of you," he said softly. "But I swear, Sophia, I won't disappear again." She didn't answer, but her silence wasn't rejection. It was fear of believing in him again, of reopening a wound that had just begun to heal. Yet as she watched him hold their son, something in her heart shifted, ever so slightly. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a piece of the man she had loved buried beneath all that darkness. And as the baby stirred again, a small smile ghosting across his lips, even Sophia couldn't help but wonder if fate, cruel, unrelenting fate, had brought Dominic back not to destroy her peace, but to finish the story they had once left unfinished. The night stretched long after that confession, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of everything unspoken. Dominic sat in the dim hospital room, the soft hum of machines filling the air, Luca sleeping peacefully in his arms. The same arms that once carried blood and bullets now cradled innocence. Every breath the baby took felt like forgiveness he didn't deserve. Sophia sat by the window, her eyes lost in the city lights below. She could hear the steady rhythm of Dominic's breathing, the quiet rustle each time he rocked their son. It didn't feel real, this version of him, gentle, patient, almost afraid to blink too hard in case the moment disappeared. She wanted to trust it. But years of heartbreak had taught her not to. When Luca stirred, Dominic looked up, his expression soft but weary. "He dreams a lot," he murmured, almost to himself. "He gets that from you," Sophia replied without thinking. Their eyes met, for a brief moment, it was just them again. Before the guns, before the fear, before everything broke, but the illusion faded as quickly as it came. She turned away, clutching her coat tighter. "You said you want to change," she said quietly. "But Dominic, men like you don't just walk away. The world you built, it won't let you." He looked at her, eyes dark but steady. "Then I'll burn it down." Sophia's breath caught. There was no arrogance in his tone this time, no cold certainty, just a promise born out of desperation. The kind of promise only a man with nothing left to lose could make. He laid Luca gently back in his crib, brushing a hand over his tiny chest before standing. "I thought I could control everything," he said, his voice low. "Power, fear, loyalty. But I couldn't even protect the one thing that mattered most." Sophia's walls cracked, if only for a moment. "You don't get to erase what you've done, Dominic." "I'm not trying to erase it," he said, stepping closer. "I'm trying to make it mean something. Maybe all that pain was meant to lead me back here. To you. To him." She wanted to push him away, to remind him of every sleepless night, every tear shed alone, but his words hit something raw inside her. She had spent years convincing herself that the man she loved was gone, buried under the weight of his sins. But now, standing in front of her, was proof that maybe he wasn't lost forever. Dominic looked down, struggling to steady his breath. "I don't know how to be a good man, Sophia. But I can learn to be a good father. Maybe that's a start." Her heart twisted at his honesty. "And what happens when your world comes looking for you?" she asked. "When they realize their boss has gone soft?" He exhaled sharply. "Then they'll learn what happens when you touch what's mine." There it was, the shadow beneath his promise. The ruthless protector, still alive under all that guilt. But this time, the rage wasn't for dominance or pride. It was for love. Sophia stood slowly, walking toward him. The space between them pulsed with years of pain, longing, and something that still refused to die. She searched his eyes again, looking for the man she once knew, the man she feared, the man she still, somehow, loved. "Words are easy, Dominic," she whispered. "Actions aren't." He nodded once, his jaw tight. "Then I'll show you." The words lingered in the air, heavy with promise and uncertainty outside. Thunder rolled across the city, distant, foreboding, like a warning. Inside, Dominic took a seat again beside his son's crib, the stormlight flickering over his face. Sophia watched him from the doorway, torn between caution and hope. For the first time in years, she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw a man trying to unlearn the only life he ever knew, one heartbeat at a time, and as the rain began to fall, washing against the hospital window, Sophia couldn't help but wonder. If redemption really existed for a man like Dominic Romano, the days that followed blurred into a rhythm Dominic hadn't known he was capable of. Mornings began with the soft cries of Luca, afternoons with the scent of baby powder and the quiet shuffle of hospital floors, and nights with long stretches of staring at the ceiling, haunted by what he had missed. Every time Luca cried, Dominic felt a pang sharper than any wound inflicted by a rival, a small, desperate wail that reminded him of every lost moment, every absence, every choice that had kept him from the life he now cradled in his arms. He learned quickly, though clumsily, how to soothe his son, how to anticipate the subtle shifts that meant hunger, discomfort, or fear. The man who had once issued commands that led to death now whispered lullabies under his breath, rocking Luca gently until his tiny hands relaxed and his chest rose and fell in the soft rhythm of sleep. Each small success was a victory, and yet it was bittersweet, a reminder of all the firsts he had missed, the first breath, the first smile, the first tear. Sophia watched him quietly, a mixture of caution and disbelief in her eyes. She had feared that he might be the same man who left her behind, the same man whose life was wrapped in shadows, untouchable and untamed. But every glance she stole revealed a different truth. Dominic Russo was learning, changing, opening to something he had never allowed himself to feel before, the pure, consuming love of a father. She wanted to believe it, yet fear gnawed at her resolve. One evening, as Luca slept nestled against a blanket on the crib, Dominic turned to her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. His suit was gone, replaced with a simple sweater and slacks, and his posture no longer carried the weight of a king, but that of a man who had just realized what truly mattered. His voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "If leaving the Mafia means keeping you both safe, then I'll walk away from everything." Sophia's eyes searched his, scanning for lies, for hidden agendas, for the familiar mask of power. But all she found was truth, raw, unguarded, unwavering. Her chest ached at the sight of him, this man she had loved and feared, stripped of armor and pride, exposing the desperate hope of a father who refused to fail again. Slowly, she stepped toward him, letting her hand brush against his. "Then show me you mean it," she whispered, voice trembling. Dominic swallowed hard, the enormity of her words crashing over him like a wave. He had spent his life in darkness, surrounded by fear, power, and violence. Walking away wasn't just leaving a business, it was abandoning the very identity that had defined him, the only world he had ever known. Yet the thought of his son, Luca's small fingers curling around his, the way his chest rose with each breath, and the memory of Sophia's soft, steadfast presence made the choice inevitable. He nodded once, firmly, a silent vow passing between them. "I'll show you," he said, his voice low but certain, the promise solidifying like steel tempered by fire. That night, he held Luca longer than usual, letting the warmth of the baby's body seep into him, imprinting the tiny, perfect features into his memory. Sophia watched from the doorway, her heart a fragile thing, torn between hope and fear, love and caution. She had spent years building walls around herself, protecting her son from a man who had once been untouchable. And now, for the first time, she saw cracks in those walls, flickers of possibility that whispered, maybe he could change. Days passed into nights, and each moment with Luca became a lesson in humility, patience, and love. Dominic found himself laughing quietly at the smallest things, the way Luca's tiny hands grasped his finger, the soft cooing that sounded like music in a world that had long been silent. He stumbled, yes, and sometimes he failed, but every failure was met with a resolve stronger than the last. Sophia's presence was steady, a gentle anchor, offering guidance and support without judgment. Slowly, the tension between them softened, replaced by the tentative beginnings of trust, a fragile bridge built on shared love for the child who had unknowingly reunited them. One rainy evening, as the city outside blurred into streaks of light, Dominic turned to her again, exhaustion shadowing his features, but determination burning in his eyes. "I don't care what it costs," he said, voice low but resolute. "I'll keep you both safe. I'll leave it all behind, the empire, the streets, the fear. I don't care what they think of me, all that matters is this." He gestured toward Luca, then to her, his hands trembling slightly. Sophia's chest tightened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. For so long, she had been uncertain, afraid to hope. But now, standing in that quiet hospital room, she could see the truth in his eyes, feel the sincerity in every word, hear the honesty in the tremor of his voice. She nodded slowly, letting her hand slip into his. "Then show me," she whispered again, softer this time, as if the words themselves could nurture the fragile new beginning blooming between them. And in that moment, Dominic Russo, feared, ruthless, and untouchable for so long, discovered a different kind of power, the power to protect, to love, to redeem himself through the tiny heartbeat of a child and the fragile, unwavering hope of a woman who had never stopped believing in the man he could become. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed clean, and within the hospital walls, the first tentative rays of their new life began to pierce through the darkness that had defined them for so long, the transition from the world Dominic once ruled to the quiet life he now embraced was neither instant nor easy, but every day brought him closer to the man he had longed to become. Gone were the nights of calculating power moves, the endless meetings behind closed doors, the cold fear that had been his currency for so long. In their place were soft mornings filled with golden sunlight spilling into the small villa in the Italian countryside, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the lane, and the sound of Luca's laughter echoing through the halls. Dominic woke slowly each day, the warmth of Sophia's hand brushing against his arm, her smile a gentle anchor he had never known he needed so desperately. At first, the memories of his past life crept into the edges of his mind, shadows of old enemies, whispers of betrayal, the faint pull of his old empire. But with every giggle from Luca, every quiet evening spent tending the small vineyard behind the villa, and every tender moment with Sophia, the darkness receded just enough for him to breathe again. He learned to find peace in simplicity, to discover joy in the mundane, washing dishes with Luca perched on the counter, teaching him to ride a tricycle on the cobblestone path, or simply holding Sophia close as they watched the sun dip behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. He marveled at how small moments, once meaningless to a man who measured life in power and fear, now carried weight heavier than any fortune he had ever amassed. Yet, even in this paradise, the past never fully released him. Sometimes he woke in the night, his chest tight, eyes darting to shadows that weren't there, haunted by fleeting visions of his old life. A shiver ran through him as he remembered the cold steel of a gun, the smell of blood, the screams he had silenced, remnants of a world he had left behind. But each time, Sophia's gentle hand on his back, her quiet hum as she stroked his hair, and Luca's small arms wrapped around his neck pulled him back, tethering him to a present he had almost abandoned. There was a fragility to these moments, a balance he had to maintain, but Dominic began to see that vulnerability was no longer a weakness. It was a gateway to something he had craved all his life: connection, trust, and love that could not be bought or forced. One evening, as the villa glowed in the last amber rays of sunset, Dominic sat on the veranda with Sophia leaning into him, Luca asleep in the cradle nearby. He held her close, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest, the rise and fall of her breathing a gentle counterpoint to his own. The scent of jasmine from the garden filled the air, mingling with the soft clink of wine glasses from the kitchen. For the first time, he allowed himself to be utterly present, free from the shadows of fear and reputation that had once defined him. I spent years being feared by the world, he whispered, voice low and trembling with emotion, but all I ever wanted was to be loved by you. Sophia lifted her head, her eyes glistening in the soft twilight, and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and a love that had endured every trial thrown in their path. The weight of his past, the mistakes, the cruelty, they were all still there, but they no longer ruled him. Dominic had learned that love required more than desire, it required sacrifice, honesty, and the courage to step into the light even when the shadows called. And in that embrace, with the soft rustle of the vineyard leaves and the lullaby of distant cicadas, Dominic Russo felt a quiet victory, not over enemies or empires, but over the part of himself that had once believed he was unworthy of happiness. He felt reborn, no longer a king of fear, but a man of heart, tethered to the family he had almost lost and the love that had patiently waited for him to arrive. Days in the Italian countryside unfolded like gentle waves, each one washing away remnants of the life Dominic had once known, until the memories became nothing more than faint echoes in the corners of his mind. He woke to sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, Luca's small hands stretching toward him with giggles that could melt the coldest steel heart, and Sophia's soft laughter filling the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. He had learned to savor these moments, the intimacy of ordinary life that had once seemed impossible, yet now felt essential. Gone were the shadows of the city streets, the whispered threats, the weight of power that had crushed everything soft within him. In its place was the rhythm of love, a heartbeat he could hold, nurture, and protect without fear. Each day became a lesson in tenderness. Dominic discovered the joy of bedtime stories whispered under dim lights, of gentle rocking in the veranda swing, of teaching Luca to walk across the sun-drenched vineyard paths without falling. There was a sacredness in these acts, a realization that life's greatest victories were measured not by fear or respect, but by the warmth of small hands clasped in his own and the sound of laughter echoing across the hills. Sophia watched him with a mix of awe and guarded hope, noting the subtle shifts in the man who had once been untouchable. He was patient now, gentle, careful with every movement around their son. He spoke softly, listened attentively, and laughed with an ease that had been foreign to him for years. Even the smallest triumphs, Luca taking his first steps without stumbling, learning new words, or reaching for Dominic's face to plant a chubby kiss, filled him with a pride that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with love. Yet, even in this sanctuary, shadows of his past lingered. At times, Dominic would wake in the night, heart hammering, visions of past violence flickering behind closed eyes. Old enemies, betrayals, and the cold weight of fear would rise, threatening to pull him back into the darkness he had left behind. But each time, Sophia's touch, her whispered reassurances, and Luca's small body curling into his arms reminded him that he had chosen a new path. He wasn't the king of fear anymore. He was a father, a partner, a man willing to rebuild the world he had once destroyed, one heartbeat at a time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rolling hills and the villa glowed in the amber light, Dominic found himself on the veranda, holding Sophia close while Luca slept in the cradle nearby. He inhaled the scent of the earth, the vineyards, the quiet life that had become theirs. For a long moment, he simply breathed, feeling the weight of years lifted by the simple, undeniable truth of family. I spent so long thinking I could only survive by being feared, he murmured, voice soft, tinged with wonder. But everything I ever wanted was right here. With you. With him. With us. Sophia pressed her head to his chest, her hand resting over his heart, as if willing him to feel the depth of love she had never stopped carrying for him. We have all we need now, she whispered, and Dominic let himself believe it fully for the first time. The past still existed, and the world they had left behind still whispered in the wind, but within the walls of their home, nothing else mattered. He had been reborn, not as a mafia boss, not as a man feared by all, but as someone capable of tenderness, forgiveness, and devotion. The soft rustle of leaves, the lullaby of crickets, and the distant echo of Luca's coos were the only soundtrack Dominic needed. That night, he kissed Sophia's hair and looked out over the vineyard, feeling peace seep into his bones. He had been tested by fire, loss, and regret, and now he had found the truth that had eluded him for so long, that life's greatest power lay not in domination, but in love, fierce, gentle, unyielding. He held her close and whispered once more, almost to himself, "I was feared by the world. But all I ever wanted was to be loved by you." And in the quiet of their villa, surrounded by the warmth of the family he had almost lost, Dominic Russo finally understood that some kinds of power, the power to forgive, to protect, and to love, were greater than any empire he could ever have ruled. The past was behind them, the future stretched before them, and for the first time, he felt whole.